Mario Sunshine is the most polarizing mainline Mario game. Actually, Mario Sunshine very well might be the only polarizing mainline Mario game. While every Mario game gets its fair share of criticisms amongst the fanbase, it seems for the most part that those criticisms are either a result of age or due to the game not meeting hype-induced expectations. 3D Land and 3D World, for example, have received their fair share of criticisms over the years because many found them to be unimaginative. And obviously, as I previously went into detail, Mario 64's age has led to a plethora of discussions. But in the case of those three titles, the games will still generally give players a good time if they give it a shot, especially during the time of release when the age discussion wasn't really a thing. Whereas with Mario Sunshine, it's more or less had an issue with its reputation since its release date. And as the years have gone on, some of those issues have become irrelevant, while others still remain a talking point to this day. I think perhaps the earliest wave of criticism came towards Mario Sunshine due to a matter that was out of the game's hands. The GameCube didn't sell well. This is kind of a no-brainer. A flagship title on a console that didn't sell nearly as well as the competition is always going to suffer a bit. Mario is a system seller. With the consoles leading up to the GameCube, everyone bought Mario. Everyone. Usually because it was available at launch or because it was packed in as a bundle, but still. Getting the game into everyone's hands was crucial for the game's popularity. Now Mario Sunshine sold well when you compared sales to the GameCube. Roughly one copy of Mario Sunshine was sold for every 4 GameCubes. But given that Sunshine wasn't a launch title and the GameCube barely made it past 20 million units sold, it means that the standalone copy of Mario Sunshine is to this day the worst selling mainline Mario game, depending on how you define the word mainline. Now that being said, while sales are important and getting the game into as many people's hands, and especially kids' hands, is important, it's not the only factor that matters. Melee and Wind Waker today are both looked at much more fondly with their respective communities than Mario Sunshine is. And I'm not saying that to imply that Mario Sunshine isn't loved. I just think there are more people in the 3D Mario fanbase that are ambivalent towards it than the Smash and Zelda fanbases towards Melee and Wind Waker respectively. And that's partially because Sunshine actually suffered from being too different to Mario 64. It's kind of funny because today we look back at Mario games and we group 64 and Sunshine into the same category. But for a long time there was a lot more angst towards Sunshine because of how different it was. You weren't able to get shines out of order as often as you could stars. Levels were too often shifted or adjusted, taking away from the open stage feel that 64 had given players. There were limited enemies, NPCs, and set pieces that even somewhat resembled what you'd expect in a Mario game. And probably the most obvious one is Mario had a water jetpack he couldn't take off and no long jump in sight. These were big deals for the time, and actually still come up as criticisms throughout the forums from time to time. There's a reason in the games following Mario Sunshine the character model isn't really hindered unless he grabs a power-up. Either the gimmicks are in the stages and gameplay, or the gimmick is hidden in Mario's cap. I actually never owned a GameCube. I'll get into that discussion soon. My sequel to Mario 64 was basically Mario Galaxy. And I'm not sure if it's just me, but the jump from Mario games is always very easy to quickly adapt to, because every Mario game feels like it takes the base 64 gameplay and tweaks it for the next game. Sunshine was the only exception to that because FLUDD completely altered the way Mario controls in a lot of instances. And if there's one thing people dislike more than games remaining stagnant and not innovating, it's change. It's funny, I remember in the early 2000s having all of these gaming discussions that would lead to someone laughing at how silly it was that the GameCube's primary titles were a Luigi Ghostbuster game and Mario cleaning an island. From the outside looking in, it seemed to many of these once Nintendo, now Xbox or Sony fanboys that Mario developers had lost their minds. But these criticisms would eventually subside because Mario 64 would eventually become less relevant after the Wii came out and time passed, since there were now more Mario games to compare things to. But Sunshine remained polarizing. Eventually you'd see many of the same complaints aimed towards Sunshine that were also aimed towards 64 that I covered pretty in depth during the 64 series. The game is more constrained and not an open world. You get kicked out of every stage every time you grab a shine, and that apparently is a bad thing. This is a lot of the same stuff I discussed previously, and I don't feel like really getting into it again, but basically I don't buy into the view that collectathons have to be done the way Banjo or Mario Odyssey did it. Every defense I made in Mario 64 about each star objectively basically being its own mission and primarily having its own set route despite starting you off in the same spot every time is a lot more relevant here because Sunshine basically turns each shine into its own stage. So while it may not be as much of a scavenger hunt as Mario 64, every single shine feels a lot more unique due to the linearity of not only the episodes, but the objectives within those episodes. The camera even glances over and tells you what and where to head towards when you start a stage. Which I think is a good thing because they can save the blind searching for the 100 coin shine and the blue coins. In case you guys were holding your breaths wondering, I will not be tabulating the amount of shines that make the game feel redundant for sending you back to Delfino Plaza. I think that was fun for Mario 64, but there are better things to focus on in Sunshine. Like blue coins. So this is a big discussion that usually comes up. In fact, I thought the blue coins would be what I was going to base this Mario Sunshine series about. Oh yeah, this video you're watching now is the first part of my Mario Sunshine series. I'll be hitting that 11 a.m. Eastern time slot every day for the next, I don't know, 9, 10, maybe up to 15 days, depending on how nuanced I want to get. And if you're new around here and love 3D Mario, check out my 26-part Mario 64 and 64DS series that I covered through the month of December and early January. Anyway, I thought I was mostly going to focus on the blue coins and create some kind of Excel sheet determining how bad they really are, but honestly, I didn't feel like that was the play here. I'll still be going over the blue coins, but it'll probably be one or two of the last couple of videos in the series. I actually don't mind the blue coin hunt outside of the episode's exclusive ones. If all of the blue coins in a stage were available to be picked up in episode 8, I'd actually say they were a very good addition to the game. The problem mostly comes from the fact that some of them can only be grabbed in specific episodes, and there is no way to track which ones you have already grabbed. You can track how many you grabbed in a stage, but not in an episode. Which means, let's say someone wants to come back at the end of the game and go for full completion, that person has been grabbing blue coins all throughout the game and just figured, you know what, I'll come back later and complete it. When that person comes back, when they decide they're just going to use a guide, they can't simply be like, oh, I have already grabbed coins X, Y, and Z from their specific episodes. Instead, they have to retrace the steps for pretty much every single blue coin and follow the guide as if they haven't grabbed a single one yet, episode exclusive or not. The issue with the blue coins in this game is less about the fact that you basically have to use a guide to enjoy it, and much more about the fact that even with a guide, it's tedious. This is why I think the optimal way to approach this game is to avoid blue coins like the plague and come back after you've gotten all the shines, and at minimum use a guide to know how many are in each specific episode. Because I promise you, even if you decide, oh who cares, it's right there, let me just grab it so I don't have to come back later, in about 100 shines from now you will most certainly doubt yourself and come back later. But outside of that, I like the blue coin challenge. The shines let you do all the focused mission-based adventures, and the blue coins let you do the searching. Effectively separating the two aspects of stars in Mario 64, since in that game both the searching and mission-based adventure was part of the star collection. This, as well as the episodic stage layouts, and the requirement to specifically get the 7 shines in all 7 of the stages in order to be able to beat the game, are all part of how Mario Sunshine streamlined the experience by removing the freedom available in Mario 64. Perhaps wording it as removing the freedom is a bit harsh, because I don't mean it to sound like a criticism. But I also don't want it to sound like praise. Rather, it's just how the game is laid out. In the same manner that Mario 64 was designed around the game's general design philosophy in order to best maximize the player experience, I think the design of Super Mario Sunshine benefits from the designers optimizing the progression around its general design philosophy. I think the two titles have a lot more differences in their philosophies than is made out. That being said, if your approach to these games is specifically to run stage by stage and completing each objective prior to moving on from any given stage, at that point, yeah, they start to feel like they have the same design philosophy. Which, and I'm not sure if this is fortunate or unfortunate for you all, is how I'm actually going to approach the series. But I'm going to do this a bit differently. While I've dabbled with Sunshine throughout the years, I've only ever truly completed it start to end once. And yes, I strategically waited this long in the video to say that because I didn't want you guys to click away immediately. But it's true. Sunshine and I have had fragmented play sessions throughout the years, and honestly it's because it took so long to get a re-release, so I usually only get a chance to play it for 1 or 2 hours at a cousin's house if I was lucky. Now obviously I could have played it on the Wii, but I was preoccupied with a ton of other games. But still, my first true Mario Sunshine experience was with 3D All-Stars. Almost immediately after it launched, where I finished it in like a week and haven't revisited the game since. And I actually think that'll make for a unique experience. Despite not playing Mario Sunshine before 3D All-Stars released, I am a 3D Mario fiend, so I've watched probably dozens of retrospectives about the game. In general, it's either someone's favorite game and they've memorized it and mastered it, or they've played it once and hated how hard and unfair it was. I got that initial learning playthrough out of the way, so going into the second playthrough I can focus a bit more on the game itself, rather than the adjustment. But I also haven't played it recently to the point where going into it, I wouldn't have to think twice about what I'm doing. And I actually think I'll have a ton of fun with not only the game, but with how I'm going to play it. Instead of just blitzing it to full completion, I'm first going to collect the 49 shines from the 7 stages and analyze every level based on those alone. I've often heard reviewers and commenters say that if you're not going for full completion, the game is actually a lot better. So I want to put that to the test. I'm going to spend the next 7 videos on each of the 7 stages. The following 1 or 2 videos covering the 3 remaining shines in each stage, as well as the 100 coin shines. The following 1 or 2 videos after that will cover Delfino Plaza and any other shine not included in the Blue Coin collection. And that segment will likely include a discussion on the hub world in general and defeating Bowser, but that's subject to change. And the final 1 or 2 videos beyond that will be dedicated to the blue coins and conclusions. And I'm going to throw an asterisk in here because I'm not sure how detailed I want to get about the blue coin discussions yet. So they really might end up just being part of the Delfino Plaza stuff. Anyway, I think we're going to land somewhere between 10 and 15 segments, but it is a bit difficult for me to specify for certain because I'm making this video before I finish the game. And honestly, I'm genuinely excited. By the end of all of this, the goal is to basically have 3 different versions of Mario Sunshine to analyze. The Minimalist run, the 96 Shine run, and the 120 Shine run. And I'd like to hopefully come away with some form of ranking and determine how each of those experiences might fare in comparison with the other 3D Mario titles. Also, since I want to tabulate something because I enjoyed doing that with Mario 64 and the DS videos, I'm going to tabulate the amount of shines that made me want to pull my hair out. I know there will be plenty, I've played this game before, so let's see if it's really as frustrating as I remember. But before I close out, I want to circle back to the discussion of Mario Sunshine's reputation. While the game did face many challenges related to the GameCube sales, the comparisons to its predecessors, gamers looking back to it with a modern lens, and heck, the fact that the game was actually rushed to meet a deadline and cut corners. I just had a weird sense of deja vu for Sonic Heroes. In my opinion, I don't think these are the main reasons Mario Sunshine has a polarizing reputation. Everything I've mentioned thus far is not all that uncommon, and generally if a game is good, it'll eventually be seen as a good game, especially if it's from a popular franchise. Personally, I think the reason this game gets so much flack is because it's the equivalent of a delicious sandwich made up of your favorite meat, veggie, dairy, butter, or whatever your stomach desires, but it's made with stale bread. When you start the game off, it's very hard to get into. And I don't mean that because the game isn't in the Mushroom Kingdom, or because of its awkward cutscenes, or even because of FLUDD. I mean that because of how long it takes to get comfortable with the controls. Most games will always come with a learning curve, but part of the beauty of Mario in general is how easy it is to pick up and play. FLUDD, with all of its intricacies, takes a second to figure out. Knowing when to spray, where to aim, and even in some cases how to aim can be tedious. A new player coming from any Mario game before or after will struggle because muscle memory does not immediately kick in the way it would if you were to go from Galaxy to Odyssey, for example. And you could have all of the instructions and manuals you like, but until you actually start playing this game with FLUDD, and getting comfortable with the controls, and when to hover, and how to spray, and where you want to spray without thinking, everything before that is a bit of a drag. You kinda need to be thrown in the deep end. You need to fall during a bunch of challenges and have the game not respond to you the way you liked, in order so that you can learn to get it right. And this will take time, potentially an hour, maybe 2. A kid buying this game on the GameCube will mess around with Delfino Plaza a ton in 2002, but a modern gamer will give it 20 minutes and say FLUDD stinks and never play the game again. And it kinda gets worse because players that were jumping from Mario 64 to Sunshine generally relied heavily on the long jump for horizontal traversal, as well as the backflip for height. Both of those are noticeably absent here, and they're noticeable pretty early on. The backflip is technically still there, but it's more similar to a side flip when you pull it off, and while yes, the side flip and dive can effectively replace Mario 64's backflip and long jump, they are not novice maneuvers and take time to adapt to. So that's 2 more things you have to subconsciously get yourself used to doing, while also focusing on FLUDD and getting used to all of the varying types of movements in the game. It's not nearly as complicated as I'm making it out to be when you look at it from a gaming lens, but from the lens of controlling Mario, this is very complex. Mario games are meant to be simple to start and somewhat moderately difficult to master. Mario Sunshine starts you off with that moderate difficulty, and I think they lost a lot of people from the get-go because they were never able to get up to speed with it. Or they just beat it once without getting any extras, so by the time the game ended, all they had was a memory of them screwing up the controls for the first half of the game, while collecting frustrating shrines for the second half. Yeah, that's the piece of stale bread. While Sunshine is filled with awesome shines and awesome challenges and some really fun NPCs and objectives, when you get to the end of the game, you'll start to really hate the experience, especially if you're going for full completion. It's legitimately not that much of an exaggeration to say a player could hate the first and last 25% of the game, while absolutely loving the middle 50%. That sweet spot after they've gotten comfortable with the controls, but before the game started getting frustratingly abusive. This is kind of the sentiment that I've seen in so many retrospectives, but I've never heard it verbalized this way. They complained about getting started, they complained about the completion of later shines, but somewhere in the middle they're having a good time. A great time even. And honestly, this is how I remember the game feeling the first time I played it. I remember at the start thinking it was way too complicated for a Mario game, and I was beginning to wonder if I would ever get the hang of it. Some of the simplest shines took me the longest to accomplish. And then I remember at some point it just clicked, and I was having a great time. And then I remembered having to retrace every step of where the first 29 blue coins were in a guide because I didn't know which one I was missing, and it turned out to be the 30th one. Delicious smoked turkey with stale bread. This also might just be me, but the first time I played Mario Sunshine, I had a really tough time with how tight the controls were. Walking on a straight plank and turning was very difficult for me. I imagine most people that went from 64 to Sunshine felt the same way, and they had to adapt to that too, which added just more frustration. I will say that this time around, I didn't struggle with that aspect of it. Actually, in general, I was able to get comfortable with Mario's control pretty quickly, even though I haven't played the game since 3D All-Stars launched. Mario's tight movements, his side flip, his dive, the spin jump, all of that was easy and muscle memory kicked in pretty quickly. But that being said, Flood did take me some time to adapt to. I was not expecting that at all, but I guess putting the game down for that long made me have to spend a good hour or so, once again, getting comfortable with the controls. But thankfully, I did eventually get comfortable with those controls. Actually, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. Let's continue this discussion in Bianco Hills.